Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello everyone and welcome to the Alternative Exit. Today, very excited about this guest. He is a distinguished expert and prominent voice in employee ownership, impact investing, and also financial wellness. John Hoffmire serves as a research associate at the University of Oxford's Centre for Mutual and Co-owned Businesses, also the director of the Centre of Business and Poverty at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, while also holding a PhD from Stanford and co-hosting the annual Oxford Symposium on Employee Ownership. If that's not enough credibility in this space, John also founded an investment banking firm that facilitated about 2.2 billion of ESOP transactions. So as you can see, John has dedicated his career to promoting sort of the inclusive economic development through innovative financial structures and, more importantly, employee ownership. And so I'm beyond excited to be able to share with this discussion with you all today. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Andy.
Yeah. So, look, heading into the world of facilitating ESOP transactions probably isn't the normal career path for many people looking to establish an investment banking firm. What led you to sort of that path towards employee ownership?
You know, Andy, I'm going to just make one small change to my bio there. I still am involved with the University of Wisconsin, but the Center on Business and Poverty was spun out of the university as what's called a 501c3 nonprofit corporation in the U.S. when I came to Oxford. But the path that you asked about is one that I just feel really lucky to be on. And the way I got onto the path was that when I went as an undergraduate to the University of California at Davis, it was clear to a lot of the progressive young students that we were surrounded by a really important occurrence. There was mechanization of the agricultural fields, in particular tomatoes, after there had been a strike the year before. And the university did the right thing, creating these mechanical harvesters that if you'd had a field planted the year before and it took 100 workers to pick those tomatoes, it took only 3 the next year. And then the year after that, they developed an electric eye that could tell the difference between a rock and a tomato, and it only took 2 workers. So you had 97 workers the first year, 98 workers out of that 100 who, just really didn't understand. As you know, that valley is one where a lot of the people, especially in the 1970s, were speaking Spanish if they were picking crops, and there wasn't a great network of information. So people blamed themselves for not being able to find jobs, and we worked with a couple hundred families to develop employee-owned farms. And I just fell in love with the concept. I could tell you more about why, but that was what got me on the path of enjoying and being able to participate in the employee ownership movement.
It's a really stark event, that transition, and it's also, it echoes a lot of, I guess, what's happening today as well with the onset of AI. It seems like there's a very similar transition that we were going through from that, heading in toward that sort of mechanization of a lot of that, of the farming, as it's all now happening to a lot of those blue collar jobs, to the white collar jobs as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you mentioned that you were lucky. Why do you see yourself as lucky to be on this journey?
Well, I'm just going to be really honest. I don't consider myself to be the brightest bulb on the tree. I just like people and ended up being able to get into some good universities, more through luck than anything else. So, that's my quick answer.
Okay. All right. And so going from that, those early days when you were sort of working and helping with those families and sort of helping those industries, but by any chance, like when you talk about sort of California, tomatoes in California and self-management or employee ownership, were you working sort of around like Morningstar Tomatoes is a company that comes to mind for me as a sort of self-managed and self-owned organization. Is that sort of the types of businesses that you were helping to set up?
Well, these were two businesses, both cooperatives. They were run through the Farm Worker Service Center in Woodland, California. We didn't actually plant tomatoes as you're referring to them, but tomatillos and a variety of specialty crops that could be essentially profitable with just a couple hundred acres. And even at that point in that part of California, you had to have more than a couple hundred acres to be a profitable farm. So the specialty crops allowed for profitability without having a huge farm.
Okay. Very cool. I'll check out those. So coming out of that work, and which is sort of coming straight out of university, what was your path towards, as I said, that founding that investment banking firm focused on the ESOPs?
Well, I was probably the least likely person in the history of the world to go to work for Bain and Company. I had a choice between working for McKinsey, who always worked with buyers in ESOP situations, and Bain worked for sellers. And I had learned enough about employee ownership to know at that point that people who sold things had money and people who bought things had less. And it was always difficult to get paid to do employee ownership work. So it seemed like a wise choice to work for somebody who actually was working for sellers. And that was Bain.
And so the pathway from Bain, like when you're working on the sellers, that obviously got you really sort of comfortable with the financial requirements of the ESOP transaction. And is that what led you into the world of sort of the investment banking?
Well, I'm going to just check your premise there. You used the word comfort. I have never been comfortable working, especially on large transactions.
Yeah.
Or large companies. So, at Bain, it was Chrysler, Sterling Drug, Canadian Pacific. All of those companies were difficult to work with. And I learned a ton, but I was never comfortable. And I think if I tried to go back and do that work today, I still would be uncomfortable. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy and love the work, but in some ways, when I told you that I'm the least likely person to have been employed by Bain, I still would be the least likely person to be employed by Bain. And in some ways, I'm really happy for that.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because I know I'm unusual. I knew at the age of 9 that I was supposed to be working with poor people. And the contradictions that grow out of really working with large corporations, working with very, very, very highly paid managers, dealing with what I think is essentially unfair, that some people get compensated so greatly while other people don't get compensated enough to really live a good life. Living with those contradictions day in, day out, at least 8 hours a day. And for really all my career, I've worked way more than 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Can be a little taxing. And again, I choose to do that. I'm not complaining about it at all, but it's all part of the discomfort.
You mentioned that you had that revelation or that awareness of being at 9 years old that you wanted to support poor people less fortunate than you. What really brought that about?
two things. I, I wrote a paper, like one of the first papers I ever wrote. Um,
At 9 years old.
well, you're not going to believe this, but it was about the Black Panthers.
Wow.
So I also was the son of somebody who went bankrupt three times, and always. I mean, it's not even legal to do that. How he was able to do that, I don't know. But he always wanted to own a car that he couldn't afford, and I can remember these used Lincoln Continentals that he would buy, and I would just slink down in the back, and would not want to be seen in that car. So, a lot of these things I think are almost biological for me.
That makes a lot of sense. So when you take through those formative years and you get your career in Bain, like as I said, you're working there, you could go any number of ways to be able to stay true to that 9-year-old self and sort of fight for sort of that equality and the people less fortunate. Like you could go to the non-profit sector, you could sort of work directly with people, but you chose to go to the world of investment banking. What drove that transition?
Well, I mean, there are two pieces here. It's why investment banking and why employee ownership. Um, I think what I'll do is address the second one first. Well, for me, employee ownership was a way to resolve um, originally. I mean, clearly, it does a lot more than this. But at the time that I was just deciding what I was really excited about, especially as a potential profession, there was a lot of labor strife. And in particular, airlines were using ESOPs as a way to deal with labor strife. And it just seemed like such a natural way for people to come together and not have there be essentially conflict between labor and capital. And so when labor became capital, I had an answer to my question. And then the second part is, well, why investment banking? And the answer there is really easy. You can't do employee ownership unless you have good people doing good things around finance. There, always have been a ton of people who liked employee ownership, but what differentiates to a great degree whether deals get done or not is whether they get financed. And and so I wanted to be in a position where either I could supply the capital to get transactions done or arrange the capital to get transactions done.
Okay. And so obviously 2.2 billion is a significant amount of capital that was arranged and serviced as part of that. I mean, I want to think more about sort of from the LP level. Okay, like because you obviously needed to get a lot of support to get access to that capital to support to support those transactions, and employee ownership still today does not have a lot of still does not have the mainstream support or the sort of the deep understanding. What were some of the ways that you were able to raise the capital for you to be able to deploy? What was really sort of resonating with your LPs or limited partners?
Yeah, so you're assuming that we were successful in finding LPs, and the honest truth is we never were. And so after years of trying to put together limited partnerships as a general partnership, the person I worked with most on those issues, Milan Wilkes, who was with American Capital, um, he had his investment bank along with Roland Klein and Adam Blumenthal, and I had my investment bank. They had, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 companies in their portfolio where if they did a transaction, they would always hold some shares in those transactions. The deals that we did, we we didn't own anything coming out. Um,
Okay.
and so they had the much stronger position. I think they knew that I had some real strengths.
Yeah.
So essentially, we worked together in a way where, for a small amount, my company was bought, and uh, I became essentially the head of the marketing side of a company that went public just a few weeks later after my company was bought. Um, so when it comes down to it, the fact that we went public was the way we got investors.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to be very honest about this. Public investors did not know as much about what we were doing as the LPs would have if we ever
Mhm.
had been able to find enough LPs to get a private fund going.
Yeah, that's it makes a lot of sense that there's a lot of reticence from the more sophisticated investors who are used to having a really clear understanding of, hey, look, these are the metrics I'm looking to see, and when something creates a different profile, it's going to create a lot of fear. Uh, do you see? Have you seen any more sort of like public like funds that have gone public supporting EO employee ownership?
Well, I know there's discussion of one doing that right now. I don't have permission from this international group that um, is talking about it to speak on that issue. But but I do think over time there probably will be more efforts to take funds that focus on employee ownership public. And let me be really clear on why that is. So if you go and talk with a limited partner and you say, I want to essentially take your money and I'm going to give you equity in exchange. If you then turn around and say, which I always like to say, that we want the employees to own more than 50% of the companies we're going to buy, what the limited partner hears is, you know, John's going to take my money, give me some equity, but he's going to give just as much equity to the employees. By the very nature of negotiation, that's a hard sell. And so what you have to be able to make a case for is that giving away more than half the shares somehow is made up through productivity or tax advantages or something else. And up until now, nobody has really been able to make that case with private investors unless um, the funds are subordinated debt funds that have a small sliver of equity associated with them. But in pure equity funds, no one has ever been able to do that in to scale in a for-profit environment in a way that's worked for any period of time. I'd be very open to somebody writing to me and saying, John, you're forgetting about, but at the very least, there are not many examples. Um,
Well, hopefully, if someone's listening, I hope they can challenge you because I'd love to learn about those examples as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Okay. So you talked there about obviously a significant challenge in sort of creating broader fundraising for EO initiatives from more sophisticated investors. If we think about, I sort of want to take it right to the other end. If you think about sort of from a business owner perspective, like what are the biggest challenges that you see on a company level? Sorry, like what are the biggest challenges you see in financing employee ownership transitions?
on the company level, it's normally that there is not a CFO in place who's ever done a transaction like this,
Okay.
and that person needs not only, and I'm going to speak first about the CFO, but there's a lot of similarities here with the CEO also. But because almost nobody you'll run into has financed a majority um, ESOP before from a CFO position, and most CFOs have not even been through a major transaction. It's just natural that if you haven't done something before, it's hard to do. Um, and then the CEO may not need to have the experience financing a transaction, but that CEO has to be bankable. And I mean, I love almost all the CEOs I've ever worked with, but a number of them were not bankable, and so that makes it hard.
And so when you say bankable, it's something that a bank or sort of traditional financial institution may not sort of believe in their strategy and their ability to execute that to be able to pay back the debt.
Even if they believed in the strategy, the real issue is whether or not the banks believed in the person as a manager.
So if you think about it, you've been doing a lot of work around like obviously driving employee ownership and evangelizing employee ownership sort of across the globe. I mean, in the UK, US, Canada, and a growing number of countries, there is existing legislature, there's taxation support to help companies transition towards employee ownership. I mean, how do you see like owners in countries without these similar sort of government support to be able to drive employee ownership within within their own companies?
So I think you're going to be fairly surprised unless I mentioned this in the short conversation we had last week. I think that the tax advantage component of what you just asked about is so important that I think the future in countries that either don't have, and I'm going to even sort of allow for the possibility that some nations, certainly for my lifetime, for your lifetime, there are going to be a bunch of them that never have significant tax advantages. And so what reasons for that are, even I would prefer that people would fund healthcare systems and good educational systems. And so to go into sub-Saharan Africa and suggest that that no taxes be paid by some significant number of corporations that are employee owned, as much as I believe in employee ownership, I can't do that. So what's the system for those nations? We're probably talking at somewhere near half the nations of the world. You said company. I'm going to redefine company to include nonprofit corporations. I think one of the things that Joseph Blasi and Doug Cruz have done so well at Rutgers is that they've really defined employee ownership, and I'm using my words here rather than theirs, to be a system that essentially gives rights to capital to employees. And so the employee ownership doesn't have to be around shares. It can be about rights to profits. And then if you define what exists in a nonprofit corporation, you might not call it profits, but every nonprofit has the ability to create a surplus. And so if in fact in that half the countries of the world, what we do is share the surplus with employees, we actually have a form of employee ownership that doesn't even need law changes. You might need to work with some trade associations to make sure that there's not blowback against the concept that that sharing of the surplus would take place. But for the most part, most nonprofit corporations can do compensation the way they want to. And so if you change the compensation to contractually give rights to employees to the surpluses, you can create an amazing amount of employee ownership actually fairly quickly. And so I'm excited about that.
Yep.
This is something, by the way, that I've just started thinking about in the last couple of months. So again, anybody who wants to write in, this is something that I want to work on, and I need help.
Okay, look, there's a couple of parts that I'd like to sort of just the threads that I'd like to pull on there. I think that the first part is, I guess, just sort of a little bit of a fear that sort of you see, like say for example, a non-profit organisation where the staff do have where the staff are delivering aid for people and they get incentivized if they have less, like, or if they create a surplus. And doing that could be either sort of by obviously raising more money or sort of being more efficient in how they deliver or sort of lowering the standards of what they deliver. How do you see as that sort of holding the line, especially to maintain, to having that surplus while still holding true to the organisation's values?
I would flip the question back to you and say, why isn't that an issue in for-profit companies? And the answer you would give me is that customers won't stand for it, and they'll stop buying if the quality goes down. Well, in every nonprofit situation, there are stakeholders who are there to make sure that the nonprofits don't get money if they don't do a good job. So I have real concerns about some types of nonprofit corporations. I mean, I'll name one. It would be really bad in certain types of church environments where the pastor ended up being able to create a surplus sharing system for, I'm going to name this as a man, for himself, and manipulated the parishioners into giving more money, and that created a greater compensation for the minister. I can name other examples too, where if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, let's do what you're talking about with my institution," I'd say no, not just in that first case, but in a number of other situations. But picking a number out of the air, I would say 90% of nonprofits could do some really interesting things with this. And just imagine schools or universities that were private nonprofits. I think there's some really interesting prospects there. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think there's some really interesting opportunities given what's going on with public universities now in the United States to consider this type of surplus sharing as a way to address what clearly is going to be an issue if the Trump administration continues down the road toward taking money away from universities that care about certain types of diversity, equity, and inclusion campaigns. If those universities don't have large endowments, and many smaller public universities don't, I think that having something like what I'm talking about could be a way to create some efficiencies and motivate what I think are necessary changes in universities that should be accomplished, but should not be accomplished in the way that Trump is trying to accomplish them.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's lots of questions about that. But if we go back, just sort of going back to sort of the profit sharing idea that you've put together, I mean, it's like this is used in for-profits in for-profit organisations a lot, like that sort of, but it doesn't necessarily create better environments or better outcomes for employees in a lot of those situations. Like it may provide better outcomes, but not better better opportunities and better and better working environments. How do you before sort of addressing that, I'd love to sort of get a bit of understanding of what do you see as the big benefits of employee ownership for workers?
So I want to address two questions there, because I think you did ask two questions. The first sounded like an attempt to debate profit sharing as a form of employee ownership. And I would just answer that question quickly by reminding you that you brought up the UK and the growth of employee ownership here. I don't think many people understand that to a great degree, the employee ownership trust, and there are elements of this in the Canadian system as well, that is significantly focused on profit sharing.
And from an employee's perspective, I see that as mainly, I get 90% of the focus really for a lot of those transactions.
That's exactly right. So if you're willing to accept that, especially the UK EOT is a profit sharing plan, then and you spoke enthusiastically about the growth of employee ownership in the UK at the beginning of this podcast, then I would say you've already answered my question about why I would be enthusiastic about that form of profit sharing. The second question is, why is employee ownership a good thing? And again, I probably am not going to answer in the way that people would think is most important here. But I think that dignity is just an incredibly important theme. You correctly suggested in your introduction of me that I work not only on employee ownership, but I work on financial wellness. Well, an interesting question is, why do I do both those things? And part of it is that I really feel like I failed in a lot of the employee ownership work that I did early in my career, where we didn't build in systems that would allow for employee owners who sold their shares to be able to benefit long term. So much of the money went to Las Vegas and up people's noses and illegal drugs. And I tell these stories too often. Um, but we started working on financial wellness as a way to address that. Um, I know that there are employee owners who have done the right things with their money, and I think other practitioners have done a much better job, especially these last 20 years that I've been more focused on my university work. Um, but because I question the ability of some of us to do as well at creating long-term benefits through employee ownership, especially for very low-income people, I look to themes like dignity as being my goal because I know I can achieve that. And I this is my weakness. I really need to feel like I'm being effective to work as hard as I do. And I have seen time and time again where the dignity of workers was respected in a greater way through employee ownership than through traditional ownership systems. And I think you've had enough experiences, and people listening to this podcast have had enough experiences to know that dignity can be one of the outcomes of employee ownership.
Definitely. I think that I mean, I love dignity as a first principle in thinking about that as employee ownership, and I think it encompasses so much of the potential outcomes for employees, and I think that that's also part of what we see, say, in the UK EOT model, like the trust is there to look after the dignity, like the dignity of the employees. I think that for me is just the part that's missing, what I've seen missing in a lot of, say, organizations or companies' corporate profit sharing plans, where, and that sort of comes down to the layer that sits below those profit sharing plans, the people who are driving those, the managers in these organizations. A lot of that is, you can still have an EOT with a bad manager where dignity is not created. But sort of creating the right environment for it is going to lead to the great sort of type of ownership culture that comes when you do give people dignity and a sense of ownership of their lives, of their working lives. Okay, so that sort of helps me, I guess, square that circle around the profit sharing piece for me. I mean, if you did talk there a little bit about how you've changed your focus and you're sort of moved towards sort of academia. What has driven that change for you and going sort of out of the corporate world, focus on supporting ESOPs to then heading into the world of academia?
Well, it'd be easy for somebody to look at this as a black and white type of switch. Really, it's just a market share type of change. So, I mean, I was helping write case studies when I was a practitioner. And I just helped sell an employee-owned company that we had for 9 years in December. I've been on a number of boards of employee-owned companies while I was an academic. Um, so, probably the best way to respond to this is to say that, especially because I had to step into a number of the companies that we transitioned into employee ownership to bring profitability up, I've really had sort of three different market shares, if you will, of my profession: management, academic type of teaching roles, and then practitioner of doing deals. And at different stages, early in my career, I was more than 50% practitioner, and now I'm down to 10 to 20%. and the part that teaches has grown.
Yep. I love the market share analogy. It's good.
Yeah.
It's perfect. And so what do you, if it's on the academia perspective, what are you focused on now? I mean, you alluded to the profit sharing piece.
Yeah. Well, I'm most involved in both building a program at the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, which is for CEOs, and a second program for CFOs, with a decent chance that we'll start another program for human resource directors. This is through the ESOP Association and the Employee Ownership Foundation that's associated there. And then I'm again working with the same people from the ESOP Association and the Employee Ownership Foundation on continuing to grow the Oxford Employee Ownership Symposium. So Jim Bonham has been my main partner there. Christy has done a lot also from those organizations to help us really develop the ideas in the case of the Darden program, and to take a conference that I had been running in Oxford for 14 years that used to have more diverse business and poverty type themes, and to turn it into something that really is significant, where we're seeing laws change as a result of people from different countries coming together and teaching each other about how they were successful in their own nations. So those are the two things that I'm most focused on in the university realms right now.
Okay, very cool. And so I've got one more question before you sort of dive into before we sort of start to wrap up. But this was more in your work that you've been sort of helping with these nations like across the globe sort of think about adopting employee ownership principles. What advice would you give to policymakers and business leaders in sort of considering these EO structures?
You know, the history of the world of effective employee ownership is to develop one case study first. You have to have one employee-owned company that you can point to before you can do the second one. And I think often policymakers feel like, oh, well, let's create this perfect policy. And instead, I would encourage the policymakers to do whatever they can to get one good employee-owned company going in their country. And so the first policy might actually be to support one firm, either through a feasibility study or through some kind of loan guarantee that might just get one deal done. And it's that process that then creates the publicity, creates the ability to go and look at something. It also, I think, when I was talking about market share a minute ago, I really should have created a fourth bucket, which is community organizer.
Yeah.
And I think if you give community organizers the ability to point to one case study, they will do amazing things. And to a great degree, I think what maybe the second step that nations should take is to figure out a way to encourage community organizers to get things done. Now, you or somebody else watching or listening to this might be thinking, oh, community organizer, I have a definition for that. But my concept of community organizer is completely different. Corey Rosen at the National Center for Employee Ownership was a community organizer. David Binns was the first director at the ESOP Association. All of them helped build the community in the United States. Graham Nuttall in the UK is a community organizer.
Deb Oxley as well, sort of followed a little bit later as the EOA.
Yeah, we could name 50 people in 30 countries right now who have their own market shares of the different type of things we're talking about. But at the best, employee ownership allowed for community organizers to build communities. And we'd have to define what exactly community means in this setting. But I think people could guess at what I'm talking about.
Yep, absolutely. I love that answer so much. So as we come to the end of the podcast, I ask all my guests a fast round of questions where I just ask you 3 questions and you just offer up a quick response. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay. Who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
He's no longer living, but Bob Fulton was the founder of Web Industries. Many people know Web Industries now, but Bob went out of his way to make sure that he hired 15% of people out of prison, out of alcohol related programs. He was a wonderful, loving man who loved to help people learn how to read better. I think that's my answer.
That's amazing. I will definitely be digging in to learn more about Bob. The second one, what is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
I use ChatGPT now for everything, and it's amazing just what's available there.
Yep. Okay. Very cool. And the last one, what would you say to a business owner who is sitting on the fence regarding a transition to an employee ownership model?
I probably would say if you're not convinced, don't do it.
Nice. Very good. We've heard very similar flavors of that from quite a few people on the podcast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, people need to be committed. Okay, very good. John, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing on the podcast. I mean, you mentioned a couple of resources and events which we'll link below. But where can people go if they want to reach out to you and have a conversation?
Well, I'll give you my email address right now, but people can also go to.
We'll put it in the chat. We'll put it in the chat for people later.
That's fine. But the Center on Business and Poverty has a website, COBAP.org. Those are the initials of the organization. But I'm one of those people who always responds to emails, so please reach out. Okay.
Look, that's brilliant. Look, thank you again so much for your time and also your leadership in the space. It's truly fantastic. And look, thank you very much for joining us on the Alternative Exit.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate it.
Cheers. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.